Do we have a housing crisis in America, and do we see it in an inflation in housing that's 30% of the statistic we're going to see in 10 minutes?
Absolutely. It is a crisis. It's a crisis of affordability at all levels. If you think about the Fed pivot a year and a half ago, it's probably had a disproportionate impact on housing because mortgage rates are such a big driver of the housing market itself. Markets like New York are sort of, it's cash, or 60%, almost 2/3 cash buyers, but those cash buyers are still looking at the financial markets. It's not that they're not impacted by rising rates. They're impacted by Fed policy. And as a result, what we've seen is a sharp drop in sales over the last year and a half, both in cash sales and in finance sales. Cash sales are down about 20%. And finance sales are down between 40% and 50%.
Let's dovetail this into 9 minutes from now when we get CPI and we get the sense of inflation. How do you see rents and home ownership just generally feeding into the inflation narrative next year? Do you think that we're just going to disinflate or reinflate some of the discussions?
I think the rental market is going to probably continue to disinflate, using your parlance. They've peaked. They peak in the summer seasonally, generally, in New York anyway, and we're seeing rents come down. But they're coming down nominally. The opposite of rising rents, as I've told you before, isn't falling rents. It's stabilizing rents. And I think we're looking at rents lower than peak, but not low, meaning that affordability is not materially improved.
Some people would argue that for rates to go back to even close to where they were before the pandemic, you would have to see a real decline in house prices. You'd have to see a real material shift in one of the biggest costs for Americans. Do you foresee that anywhere on the horizon?
No, simply because inventory is at, closer at all-time lows in many of the markets most of the markets around the country. That is the housing metric that has been the story.
Help us here, oh wise one. We're going to get this report in 7 minutes. McKee's going to go month over month, year over year. We're all living, our listeners, our viewers are living pre-pandemic. You have published the Miller rent inflation statistic is we're up 30%. Since pre-pandemic, since 2019. How long is it going to take us to lose that pain?
I would think 2-3 years, even with rate cuts. I think it's a while. Rental markets have momentum of being sustained at a very high level for a long period of time.
So we're going to be miserable here, seriously. I'm not making a joke, folks, till 2027.
I would think so. There's not going to be, at least based on what we know now, there's not going to be a rental price or purchase price correction. Unemployment is too low. Wages are elevated. It's hard to imagine. I mean, if you look at a Fed rate cut in the second half of 24, that's a year from now. So, and that's not going to change overnight. One sort of positive component to this is I think that any kind of rate cut on the for sale market is going to have a disproportionately high reaction in terms of sales activity, that there's some sort of, the rate pivot interrupted what was this rocket ship of demand. So I think any minor cut is probably going to, we're not talking going to 4 or 3% at all. What we're talking maybe going in the 6s from the mid 7s.
That's enough to grease the wheels?
I think that's enough to grease the wheels, at least in the near term. Remember, right now in the most suburban markets, we're looking at bidding war market share of 40 to 50% of closings.
Are still in a bidding war?
Absolutely. We had a lull in the summer. The suburbs that surround New York you're looking at 40 to 55% of the closings in the third quarter were bidding wars.
Could you see John, out in Larchmont or, up in
Bronxville?
Bronxville.
I look in
or
Bronxville all the
further
time.
north?
There's no supply.
you know.
There's no supply, Jonathan, coming online at all. It's the same old houses.
It's much tighter in the suburbs than it is in the city. If you're to buy, I'm not saying it's more affordable, but the city relative to most markets, because it was late to the party, actually has more supply. It's just still not.
You know anything in the 60s, 70s for John? He's, you know, we're out of
Figure this out.
Evidently, he's looking at 5 houses north of the city.
Based on TK's track record.
I feel like that's the only reason I'm brought on is to give you house hunting advice.
You got that right.